Lesbian and Sapphic literature has a varied and often difficult history. The subject of lesbianism was obviously taboo, and so books containing lesbian themes, plots, or characters were often banned or not published at all. There was a time period where, due to strict censorship codes, all homosexual characters had to have tragic endings, as a kind of moral for the reader that, quote, homosexuals get what they deserve in the end. This was most common in lesbian pulp fiction. The lesbian character was often portrayed as a villain, with dark designs on the heroine corrupting them. Despite the censorship and homophobic responses from the public, a few lesbian works made it through unscathed. Luckily for us, that era ended, and lesbian literature is alive and thriving. For this series, I have compiled a list of what I think are some of the most influential lesbian works of literature, and will be delving into each one and the impact it has had on lesbian and sapphic culture, as well as examining the contents in the light of what we now know about gender and sexuality. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Classic Lesbian and Sapphic Literature. I am so sorry that this took so long to get out. I have been working on this one since last year when the first episode came out. I've just had so much going on, and this project is really a labor of love and also quite exhausting. So I had to put it by the wayside for a little while. But I am finished, and I am ready to present it all to you. And today, of course, we are talking about the classic lesbian vampire novel that started it all, Carmilla. This novel predates Dracula by about 60 years and has been a staple of lesbian and sapphic media for a very long time. So I'm very, very excited to discuss this one with you. The edition of the book that I read is the one that has been edited by Carmen Maria Machado. I originally read an unedited version way back in high school, which began my love affair with Carmilla and lesbian vampires. And so it was really wonderful to read a version that's edited and footnoted by a queer woman. So let's get started. As always, this video series is not to argue for or against the book or author in question, but simply to examine the contents and the context of the novel in light of what we now know about gender and sexuality. Carmilla by J. Sheridan the Fanu, published in 1872, is one of the earliest works of lesbian fiction and predates Dracula, giving rise to the Gothic vampire genre. It seems that lesbians and vampires have been going hand in hand since forever. Unfortunately, due to the era that it was written, it depicts Carmilla as the stereotypical predatory lesbian. Vampirism, in this case, is an analogy for the idea of the predatory lesbian. This is shown in the way that Carmilla preys on the innocent straight girl, corrupting her. Carmilla is shown to be passionate about Laura in a distinctly sickly way, inferring that her lesbianism/vampirism is the reason that she acts like this. Laura, the main character, likes the attention, but also says that it makes her feel sick. This kind of homophobia does not take away from its importance in early lesbian literature history, nor from its status as a classic, however. Lesbians and queer women have reclaimed Carmilla, reveling in her obsessions and bloodthirst. They have gone on to write and film many lesbian-centric pieces of media inspired by the book. In the introduction to the edition of Carmilla that was edited by Carmen Maria Machado, Carmen tells us the story of how Le Fanu was inspired to write Carmilla from the story of Marcia Marin, who inspired the character Carmilla, and Veronica Hussel, who inspired the character of Laura. These two women had a very passionate and sexual love affair that was surrounded by strange events in the sky, terrifying dreams, and culminated in the eventual murder of Marcia. From the very get-go of the novel, Sheridan wants us to believe that Laura is a completely innocent heterosexual girl who does not understand Carmilla's darker brackets, vampiric and lesbian desires, and is naive and oblivious. This to me, however, is undermined by a passage from the first chapter where Laura is grieved to discover that a girl who was supposed to visit her has passed away. Laura has supposedly been daydreaming of spending all her time with this girl for weeks and was unspeakably disappointed. That, to me at least, as a lesbian reader reading this in lesbian context, reads as a sapphic character who has not yet had her sapphic awakening and is just obsessed with her female friends and doesn't know why. Laura is also instantly attracted to Carmilla in a very sudden way that is stereotypically true of sapphic people in real life. I knew from the moment that I met my girlfriend that she was the one for me. You know, the stereotype has its truths to it. Unfortunately, and also unsurprisingly, considering the time at which the book was published, this book contains racism. So, trigger warning for discussion of racism in the book. Considering everything about this novel, it's really important that we don't gloss over it. During the scene of the faked carriage accident when Carmilla first arrives at Laura's estate, a black woman who is in the carriage is referred to as hideous and grinning sinisterly at the onlookers. According to Machado's footnotes, this character could be the mysterious Matska that Carmilla refers to in this scene. Matska means large cat in Slovenian, Slovakian, Serbian, Romanian, and Hungarian, which are all languages that would have been spoken in Styria, which is where the novel takes place, at this time period. Scholars of the book say that this could be evidence that Carmilla was in fact not the large black cat in Laura's dreams, but instead Matska was, which would render Carmilla innocent of the crimes for which she was murdered. Apart from the terrible description of this character, if this lady is Matska, that in itself is a form of racism, to have the only black character be characterized as a vicious large cat. Black characters and characters of color are consistently dehumanized by making them turn into animals or have them be shapeshifters, and this trope continues right into modern media today. When researching for this video, I also stumbled across an essay from Clark University here in Canada titled "The Racialization of Homosexuality in Carmilla," where the author, whose name unfortunately I was unable to find, posits that Carmilla, quote, was a racialized other in the story and is indicative of 19th century Britain's concerns regarding the possible corruption of English women whose purity, chasteness, and moral aptitude were considered to be threatened by the influence of highly sexualized foreigners. In Carmilla, this is seen through the lens of homosexuality, discourse around which has been historically racialized. Fanu employs heavy description of naturalistic imagery and makes repeated references to Carmilla's association with the mystical, animalistic, and sexual elements in an orientalized conflation of her alterity and sexual desires, end quote. The author then goes on to say that Laura is the picture of Victorian standards, with golden hair and large blue eyes, a bright disposition, which is in direct contrast with Carmilla, who has dark hair, dark eyes, and a languid, melancholy, and sexually deviant disposition. Thus, it becomes evident that Le Fanu uses homosexuality as a vehicle for racism in this novel. As the book continues, we see Laura and Carmilla become extremely close. Laura is totally enamored of Carmilla and desires to know everything about her. However, Carmilla will tell her little and instead placates her with kisses, caresses, and sweet words. We learn from Laura that she does not want to be in these embraces, but finds herself unable to back out of them, once again promoting the idea that lesbianism is something that one can be corrupted into. On the other hand, it's also Carmilla's vampire powers at work. I will reiterate again, vampirism and lesbianism are inextricably tied together in this book. This particular quote explains it. Quote, "In these strange moods, I did not like her. I experienced a strange, tumultuous excitement that was pleasurable ever and anon, mingled with a vague sense of fear and disgust. I had no distinct thoughts about her while such scenes lasted, but I was conscious of a love growing into adoration, and also of abhorrence. This, I know, is a paradox, but I can make no other attempt to explain the feeling. From this quote, we learn much. Carmilla, as always, is the predatory vampire lesbian who is manipulating the straight woman into loving her, and Laura is at war with herself. She both loves and is excited by Carmilla, and is yet disgusted by her. This is something that I feel is common among women who thought they were heterosexual, who maybe were raised very religious, who had a lot of fear and disgust around their own sapphic feelings. And when they are placed in a situation where they are experiencing sapphic love for the first time, they're excited by it, but they're also having to combat their own internalized homophobia. So for me, this particular quote can definitely be read not just as Laura being disgusted by the vampiric nature of Carmilla, which she does not yet know about, but on a deeper level is indicative of her own internalized homophobia. She's so excited by Carmilla and she loves her, but that internalized homophobia is giving her these feelings of fear and disgust, which is something she has to overcome. I think something that we all have to overcome. No matter how liberally you were raised, all of us have a degree of internalized homophobia to some extent. Laura seems to be confused as to why Carmilla is being so overtly romantic towards her, and even goes so far as to wonder if Carmilla is perhaps a boy disguised as a girl so as to win her over, like in old storybooks. There are many such instances in classic lesbian literature where the problem of homosexuality is fixed by having one of the women involved reveal themselves to be a man at the end. Now, this next bit has nothing to do with the queer aspects of the novel, however, I found it a very interesting tidbit. There is a fascinating exchange described by Machado as being an early example of how, quote, religious imagery and ceremony is loathed by vampires. There is a funeral procession that passes by Laura and Carmilla while they are outside, and Carmilla is thrown into a rage by it and says some terrible things. In the funeral procession, there are hymns being sung. It is a very religious scene. And considering that Carmilla is one of the formative works for the Gothic vampire genre, it is not a stretch to think that that particular detail is one of the reasons why vampires as a species are so adverse to religious imagery in later novels. The next romantic scene that confirms the inherent lesbianism in the book, Carmilla tells Laura that she has never been in love and never will be unless it be with her. Now, for me, there's no other way to interpret this other than romantic, especially from a modern viewpoint. However, it is important to note, for context, that just prior to the writing of the novel, romantic friendships between women were the norm, and dramatical romantic language, usually reserved for cis-hetero relationships, was used in these friendships. An example of, a romantic friendship in literature would be Anne and Diana from Anne of Green Gables. They use extremely romantic language for each other, and the sapphic-ness of their friendship is definitely something that I want to explore in another video at some point perhaps, but that if you have read the books, you will remember how romantic they were towards each other. For more on the sapphic nature of romantic friendships, please listen to the Lesbian Historical Motif podcast that has extensively covered the phenomenon in excellent detail. Highly recommend the podcast. I listen to it all the time, and they do some great work on there. Now, this next little bit will be interesting if you have watched the web show, which I'm also a very big fan of. So I found some lines that they directly lifted from the book, which is pretty exciting considering that the web show is very loosely based on the Carmilla novel. Most of it is just the same name, and then they've completely made up a whole other list of things. Especially as the seasons go on, they've kind of really diverged. So I was really excited to see that in the scene where Carmilla talks about her first ball and how she was turned into a vampire, that scene is directly from the book, which was just beautiful. And I discovered that the theme show of the web show, Love Will Have Its Sacrifices, is also a line directly lifted from this scene. It made my fangirl heart so happy. We now come to the part of the novel where the horror aspects really start to come through. So we've got horrible dreams, mysterious illnesses, that kind of horror. Laura dreams of a horrific black cat with 2 teeth piercing her chest, and she awakes with a scream. Later, Carmilla also complains of a similar dream, except she used a charm that she got from a peddler, and the dream dissipated. This progresses until Laura has undoubtedly come down with a mysterious illness that is plaguing the countryside. There is also a passage where she describes a strange dream in which a woman's voice is talking to her and she is caressed and kissed until she has convulsions. In the footnotes, Machado says that this has to be a description of an orgasm, and I agree, there isn't really another explanation for these convulsions from kissing. Although, as usual in the book, the description of this event makes it seem dark and sinister, which, when you take into account the ideas circulating society at the time of writing about women's sexualities and orgasms, this is not surprising information. It is quite natural that Le Fanu, if that was his intention with this scene, would have villainized it. I also found another really interesting essay about Carmilla when I was researching, called No Place for Men, Carmilla and Lesbian Vampires by Isabel Panadero on the By Arcadia blog, where she talks about it's interesting that men play not a very large role for most of the novel. Laura's father remains unnamed, pretty much an inactive character, and General Spielsdorf is also very ineffective. Instead, she talks about how women take the helm in the story and take charge of their sexualities. Carmilla herself appears to totally reject men and the patriarchal system, her behavior as described in this essay. So, quote, "When Laura's father exclaims, 'We are in God's hands. Nothing can happen without his permission. He is our faithful creator. He has made us all and will take care of us.' Carmilla responds, 'Creator, nature. All things proceed from nature, don't they? All things in the heaven, in the earth, and under the earth act and live as nature ordains? I think so.' She is refusing to comply with a Christian God that idolizes male power and prefers the female mother nature that fully embodies her relationship with women." End quote. Unfortunately, as Panadero goes on to point out, this female leadership comes to a brutal end when an all-male group of vampire hunters stake her, decapitate her, burn her, and throw the ashes into the river. This sudden, jarring turn of events is indicative, to me at least, of the male need to always be the one in control at the center of things, and certainly Carmilla disrupts that with her lesbianism. In the end, Laura recovers from the mysterious illness, but she is never rid of the idea of Carmilla saying that, "Often from a reverie I have started, fancying I heard the light steps of Carmilla at the drawing-room door." End quote. Panadero makes the case that once Carmilla had opened Laura's eyes to an existence without men, Laura can never return to her former heterosexual life. She is now existing outside of that patriarchal system and will continue to do so. And so we come to the end. What a tale! I hope I have properly illustrated the complicated, frustrating, and yet fascinating and dual nature of Carmilla. It is a story that has captivated audiences for centuries, and yet it is an incredibly problematic work of literature. It is a work simultaneously where women could express their sexualities, only to have that taken away at the end of the novel by a patriarchal society. These lesbians certainly do not have a happy ending. So why are queer women so obsessed with a novel that paints lesbianism as its villain? I think perhaps it's because we are so often villainized in the real world that we have come to sympathize with Carmilla and her vampiric lesbian nature. Perhaps it's because we see a hot lady villain and lose all sense of morality.
He was the best guy around.
What about the people he murdered?
What murder?
And most of all, maybe we see a little bit of ourselves reflected in Laura and Carmilla, even if that reflection is severely distorted. Thank you for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts in the comments down below. What is your take on Carmilla? What are your thoughts? Do you have anything you would like to add? I would love to hear it all. And yeah, this has been episode 2 of Classic Lesbian and Sapphic Literature. The next book is going to be The Well of Loneliness by Radcliffe Hall. And I honestly have no idea when that one is going to be out. That's going to be a long while from now. But thank you so much for watching. Subscribe, hit the like button, and I will see you all in the next video.